Hello everybody, and welcome to the Whiskey Dictionary, where I do the research to try to teach you a little something about what you're drinking. Tonight I'm going to be talking to you about some starter bourbons. Now if you happen to find this video just because it seemed short and it seemed to be about what you wanted, I'm not going to waste your time. Go out and get some Four Roses or maybe some Buffalo Trace, you'll be good. But if you're interested in getting a little bit more in depth, stick around for my definitive bourbon starter guide. Let's get started. A quick little disclaimer before I get started. So I've been around the internet long enough to know how lists work, and I know that people tend to get disagreed with pretty enthusiastically. So I actually think that's awesome, and I think that drives discussion. So if you think that you have a better bourbon than anything I've put on this list, which by the way, I totally stand by this list, and I think it's a very solid list, and I think a lot of bourbon drinkers would agree with this list. That being said, put your suggestions down in the comments. As you enter more stuff, if people agree with you, they're going to give it a thumbs up. It will rise to the top. And a year from now, when somebody new to bourbon comes and checks this video out, they're going to see all those comments and they'll see possibly better suggestions. I think that's great. I don't see how that's a negative. So please add things down to the comments. All right, outside of that, I'm not going to do a nosing and a tasting for all of these whiskeys for two reasons. Number one, I've actually done a video on several of these whiskeys, and I'm going to make a playlist so that you can kind of start here and then go through all of those whiskeys. And reason number two is it would get increasingly harder to do this video if I were doing a tasting of each one of these whiskeys. So that all being said, let's get into the list. So the first place I'd like to start is with Buffalo Trace. And the reason for that is twofold. You've got a very cheap price point. It's usually around mid-20s or so, and it's great. A lot of bourbon drinkers actually keep a bottle of Buffalo Trace in their cabinets or in their bars or whatever. It's just pretty good. It's extremely approachable too. Despite how popular it is, it's actually pretty unknown to people who don't typically drink whiskey. So it's a great place to start. After that, I would suggest going to Bulleit Bourbon, and there's a couple of reasons for this too. You've got the ease of finding it. It's at pretty much every bar. And then it also mixes well, so if you'd rather ease into bourbon by making cocktails, then ask your bartender what they would suggest, or look something up online. But one way or another, Bulleit is tasty. It tastes like a bourbon in the most general sense, and it mixes well. So it's a good starting point. After that, I'd like to move to something that's a little bit more. This is Four Roses, and Four Roses has several different expressions. They've got a single barrel, not cask strength. They have single barrel and they have small batch. And outside of that, they've got this, which is kind of their baseline. I think this was like $16. It's very cheap, but it's good. And a lot of bourbon drinkers would agree that this is a great place to start. It's tasty, but it's not very complex. All right, what you want for complexity, or as far as bourbons that start with go, is Eagle Rare. Now, Eagle Rare is probably the first bourbon on this list that will challenge your taste buds at all. You're going to finally get to kind of learn about your palate and see what else you can taste in a bourbon other than just wood and oak or vanilla. So give Eagle Rare a try. After that, we're gonna go to Knob Creek. Now, the reason I picked Knob Creek is for its ease of being found. It's at most bars, so that's nice. You don't have to buy a whole bottle, and it makes a great old fashioned. So that's actually what I would suggest if you ever want to try an old fashioned for the first time. Order it with Knob Creek, but it's also 100 proof. So be a little aware of that when you're drinking it, that you're going to lose your sensitivity to taste pretty quickly. Speaking of 100 proofs, my next suggestion is Wild Turkey 101. And the reason I picked this one is that, it's over 100 proof. So you're gonna see how ABV actually affects your taste buds. You're gonna see, it can bring out different flavors. So I would suggest Wild Turkey. The price point was a big seller on this one, but in general, the taste is pretty good as well. All right. After that, this one's a little bit more for me. And as you can tell, the bottle's pretty low. And if you've been watching this channel for a while, you'll see that this bottle's shown up a couple of times actually. I personally love Woodford Reserve. This one's on here because it's something that I personally enjoy, less so than just I think the general population would love. So I find this one to be pretty complex. It's a little spicy, which is wonderful, but I love Woodford Reserve, and I just love the way that their brand has like lore behind it. It's steeped in history is probably a better way to put it. You can also usually find this at bars, so if you want to just give it a try, go for it. All right, and then lastly, I'm going to talk about Maker's Mark. Now, I've recently done a couple of videos on this. You could either go with the Maker's or the Maker's 46. I would probably suggest Maker's because, once again, you can find it easily in a bar, and you can also buy fairly cheap bottles. So this is my list, as well as a couple of the bottles I mentioned that aren't right here. There's not a ton of things that I really wanted to get into. I didn't want to overload you with 20 different options. I think whatever this was, 8, 9 different options was plenty. And if there's any more that you want, write a comment down in the comments and I'll respond. But I think that if you were to try all of these different whiskeys, or even half of them, you're going to start noticing some similarities between them. And hopefully you start noticing some nuances between the different types of whiskeys here too. So yeah, I didn't do this on purpose, although all of these whiskeys are usually well under $50, but at the very least they're all under $50. So you can try a lot of these. Like, I think I bought 4 of these bottles tonight for like 80 bucks. It's really not very expensive. But that all being said, that concludes my list. I hope that you've enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you next time here on the Whiskey Dictionary.